I think of Martin Luther King Jr., and he once said, to deny people their human rights is really to deny their very existence. And as Emo looks at our work, and I really do mean this, I think our work really is what matters. And part of our work is this. We're here at a Collins lecture to discuss an issue which many people are fearful to discuss. Years ago, even Emo might have said no to having this topic discussed at one of its Collins lectures. So I am very proud of the organization that we are. I'm very proud of the work that we're doing to not just sometimes take a side, but to bring the sides together. And I think at this moment, we should be supporters of a country that is admired and not feared. And in our work that we do, whether it's with immigration, whether it's migrants, whether it's with homeless youth, whether it's a plethora of other work that we do, the thing that I've often reflected on is my first week, and I had the opportunity to meet with our staff that works with our refugees, and I said, do we help these folks because they're Americans? No, Frank, they're obviously not Americans, and that's true. We help them because we are Americans, and that is who we are, and that is who Emo is. And so when we stand with one community, we stand with all communities, and the community that is harmed is one now that will be of many, so we need to stand with all. Anyway, my name is Frank So. I am very happy to welcome you to our 2025 lecture. It's the second time that Emo has been out here in Pendleton since I've been the executive director, but the first time that we've taken a lecture really outside of the Portland metro area. I come, even though we don't have internet right now, with a lot of gratitude. Gratitude for those that are here, and gratitude for those that will be listening online and following this conversation. But I also come with a lot of gratitude for the staff who put this together, for our board, for our committee, Theo Ed committee that's here, and for our staff who really believes in the importance of our discussions. And to all of you who are friends of Emo and understand why we do this and why it's so important, especially now, especially with a lot of the unjust policies that we're seeing from this administration. We have great folks that we're going to listen to, so I'll keep my remarks really short. I would like to welcome now a friend, someone who's a friend also of Mount Adams Institute, Lindsay Watchman, to help us start the night off with our land acknowledgement. And if you should all have one of these with all of our guests and speakers. So, Lindsay, welcome. Thank you.
Test, test, test. My voice is really deep. It doesn't carry over a microphone very well. But first of all, thank you, Frank, for the invitation. Again, the work that you helped do with Mount Adams Institute. And again, Emo, I appreciate you taking the healthy risk driving out here to the east. I'm part of Oregon, and my responsibility tonight is to give you a proper land acknowledgement. So Tots Klauet, Ni Klauet, Ku Shias Klauet, Makas Katsiaya, Haniwatona Kila Haipa, Intamina, he was Laloitsa Kipium Kitpa, Inwa Niksha, Tatel Katimki, he was Patiwas, Ka Soyapo Timki, Lindsay Watchman. So I said, good evening in each of the three languages that are still spoken on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. We are a confederation of three tribes, the Cayuse, the Umatilla, and the Walla Walla. We are good hosts. We've been hosting, we hosted Lewis and Clark as they made their way to the ocean. We got a couple of Jefferson Peace Medals. We hosted them on the way back. And then, of course, the Oregon Trail came upon us, and there was a lot more people to host. Let's put it that way. Limited resources, waterways that were needed to sustain communities, including my European side, which is Finnish, which homestead, so I'm 9th generation on my European side. So I welcome you in many ways to this area of northeastern Oregon. For my tribal side specifically, we used to have a territory that spanned about 6.4 million acres. We wouldn't call it our territory. Private property ownership is, a foreign concept. But that was about the vastness of our seasonal round. And in that seasonal round throughout the year, where we have a couple runs of fish, we've got deer in the mountains, we have roots and berries coming out at all different times during the year. So that's that seasonal round, not nomadic in any way, very in tune with this land and this area. And of course, for those that need scientific evidence, the Kennewick man was found along the Columbia River, 10,000-year-old moccasins and caves. In fact, when we were building our golf course, we came across a woolly mammoth tooth, so we do have an annual mammoth tooth tournament, right? Mammoth Cup, that's what it's called. But again, yeah, so my people have been here for quite a while, At one time, the spears and loincloths, we get a chance a little bit fancier these days, but things again changed a lot in 1855 with, again, all the local conflicts. We signed a treaty with the United States government, and that was to create a reservation, a specific period, a location of land with boundaries that we would be able to be safe at. And that used to include Pendleton. Years after the reservation boundaries diminished, Pendleton was annexed to create the city of Pendleton. So the reservation is really just about 2 miles, begins 2 miles to the east, and is about 172,000 acres, which is about 250 some acres, square acres. So we have that much land and natural resources to be responsible from creek all the way to mountaintop, where we dig our roots and everything in between, including the people. I'm one of about 3,200 tribal members, of the Confederate Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. We have a couple other tribal members in the house as well. Other tribal members, raise your hand. Audiovisual, awesome. Becoming professionals and lots of cool things, and really, this is a cowboys and Indians town, but we get along a little bit better than the old Wild West days. So, just with closing a little bit, we started our government in 1949 with the Constitution bylaws. We have a democratic process. Every 2 years, we elect officials, somewhat like a city council. I was on that tribal council for a couple terms during COVID, which has no precedent, to anybody who was ever in leadership, before, and it's changed us all since. But heavy responsibility for just even 3,200 tribal members. So, in closing, I know how it feels to, keep that energy up, to keep that self-care for yourself as you go out and take care of other people. That I can tell by your mission statement of EMO that, and your shirts, right? Very people, not, capital interested. So it makes you a little bit easier for me to bond with. So I appreciate being here. I don't want to take up more of your time. I do look forward to listening to, all the intelligence in the room, and I'm learning from you all. So Yokoklo, appreciate you all. Thank you.
Now it's my distinct pleasure also to welcome an EMO board member, a good friend, and someone who's very local to this community. Pastor Charlotte Wells, would you please come up and say a couple words? Thank you.
I'm pretty thrilled that this is happening because we've been working on this for almost 2 years now, so yay! My name is Charlotte Wells. As you've heard, I am on the EMO board, but I'm also a member of the Theological and Education Commission, and I am the local Episcopal priest. So don't hold my church accountable for me, please. Or if you like it, then do hold them accountable. I wanted to ask you to join with me in prayer, please. Creator God, help us to remember that life is short and that we have never too much time for gladdening the hearts of those who are traveling the dark journey with us. Help us to remember to be kind. Help us to remember to love one another. Help us to listen with open hearts, with open minds, with open bodies to the wisdom that our speakers will impart today. We ask that you bless all of this to our use and bless us to your service. And we ask this in your sacred name. Amen.
now I get another distinct pleasure to invite the chair of our Theo Ed Committee and also an EMO board member, Dr. Julie Dodge, who is, I would also say, a very, very good friend, not just to EMO, but to me. So please welcome Dr. Julie Dodge.
So thank you so much for being here and for your patience as we dealt with some of the joys of technology, grand aspirations, but it'll work out eventually. The annual Collins Lecture and Summit explores issues related to religion and social ethics. This has been a signature event of EMO and its predecessor organization, the Portland Council of Churches, since 1967. But as Frank said, this is the first time we've been to Pendleton. And Reverend Charlotte's been trying to get us out here, so we're very glad to be out here. I get the joy of doing some acknowledgments, people that you care about or don't care about, but we do. The Collins Foundation, which funds the Collins Summit, hence the name. And I want to acknowledge our Theo Ed community, which includes Dr. David Wheeler, Imam Abdullah Polavina, Reverend Charlotte Wells, Dr. Greg Birch, Jan Elfers, Reverend Ryan Scott, Carla Starrett Biggs, and Reverend Allison Kennedy Smith. We've got a great group of folks who are committed to having these conversations. I also want to acknowledge the fantastic team from EMO who has put this together, who have been probably freaking out way more than I have over the last 45 minutes going, what? We have 100 people out there waiting. So I want to start with our director, Frank, whose vision makes a lot of this possible. Christy Bach, who has helped coordinate this. Greg Supriano, who's not here in person, but is managing the technology out there somewhere. Andrea Omajola, Francis King, Michelle Bush, Erica Martin, and Elizabeth Stoker. Most of them are here and have been part of making all this happen, so I want to say thank you to them. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. We know we live in a world that does not agree. As Frank said, we're struggling with that. It's having major impacts. We may share some common goals, but we don't always agree about how to get there. Today, we are thinking about the question about how faith communities can support civil and human rights for people in the LGBTQIA2S community. We may have different ideas about this, but we are approaching the question from the foundation that our faith calls us to act justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly. And we suggest that justice grounded in mercy and love applies to all people, period. We encourage taking a posture of humility, that we would listen and learn from one another. We have invited 4 incredible speakers. Usually we don't have 4 speakers, but the folks here bring such a breadth of experience and knowledge that it was like, well, we want them all. So we have 4 speakers who will be able to share their stories. We invite you to listen and hold open minds and hearts. Each of our speakers will have about 10 minutes, and then that will be followed by a Q&A session facilitated by the Reverend Andrea here. And we have a couple of questions that we have pre-provided them to just get things going, but if there are questions that you have, please write them down. We tend to write them down, and then we can hopefully get to them as we're able. We're going to do our best to do that. We know that there might be folks here who disagree with one or more of our speakers, and that's okay. We're glad you're here. We do invite you to listen, to seek understanding, and at the end of the evening, perhaps we'll all have gained something that we didn't anticipate. So I invite you to join us in modeling peace, humility, and curiosity, and I'm super excited for you to meet these folks. And again, thank you so much for your patience. And I'd like to welcome Andrea Almajola to the stage, and all our friends to come on up.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much. We are so grateful for this time, and we're not going to belabor the time. We're going to jump right into our first speaker, who is Christopher Cron. Cron? Did I say it correctly? Okay, great. She joins the Episcopal Church of Western Oregon staff in December of 2021 as the canon to ordinary, and previously she served at St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church as the first woman and openly gay rector of the parish. But what you may not know about her, and what she may not want me to tell you, is that she loves karaoke. And when I asked her what her favorite song for karaoke, because like everybody has a go-to song, she was like, wait, no, like for real, like I do karaoke regularly. So there's not even a song, so maybe one day she'll like actually like sing or something for us. Maybe part of her presentation will be in song. But we ask you to welcome her right now for this time.
Thank you so much. I can assure you, you do not want to hear me sing without loud music playing behind me. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I am Christopher Cron, and I always kind of laugh a little bit that I'm named the first openly gay and first woman rector of St. Michael and All Angels, because the rector before me started in 1980, and they had just started ordaining women in my denomination, so there really wasn't a chance. I think St. Michael's would have been ahead of the curve, but I was very proud to serve at St. Michael and All Angels. I grew up in a very particular bubble. Sometimes people think of a bubble as being in a rural area or being sort of set out in a place, and I grew up in the very particular bubble of being in the Bay Area of California. And in that bubble, I was always so self-assured and felt so free to be myself and felt so loved. And that was grounded in my place, it was grounded in my family, and it was grounded in my church. I grew up in an Episcopal church. I'm one of the last generations of cradle Episcopalians that's coming up. There's not many of us coming behind me, except my kid. He is still very loyal Episcopalian. But I grew up in a church that prioritized youth work. They prioritized having a youth minister. And that we were asked to sort of say one thing that if we could say a church community could bring and offer for LGBTQI plus folks, it's actually just to have a youth person, someone who is there to tell youth that they are loved, that they belong, that they have something to say in the world, and that no matter what, no matter who they are showing up as in that moment or whoever they will become in this world, that they are loved. And that was a driving force for my experience growing up. I always knew that I belonged in the church, and that was from my experience of being in youth group, and it was my experience of being at church camp in the Diocese of California, and I knew that I was going to be okay. And then I went to college, which usually is people's sort of wonderland of fun and a place where they then begin to feel like they belong. And instead, that bubble that I grew up in dissipated, and I found myself in a strange land. Shouldn't have been that strange. It was San Diego, California. But it was a place where I could not find my church. I could not find my place. I could not find a campus ministry that was open and affirming. And it was a struggle for me for those 4 years until I graduated and went right back to the Bay Area and California and went right back into youth ministry and started working in that field. Something that happened at that time then after I graduated was that I started to discern a call to the priesthood. And in that call, it was right around 2003. And many Episcopalians will remember that that was the year for which Gene Robinson had been elected and consecrated the first openly gay bishop in New Hampshire and in the Anglican Communion. And it created chaos and division and sides that started to go at each other that in my little tiny bubble I didn't know existed. And in that moment of trying to decide, feeling this call of wanting to provide and be part of a church that was going to tell all these people, you're loved, congratulations, you belong. and then seeing, do we? This is really, really painful. And in that moment, seeing how many people stood up, people who became allies that didn't know that they were allies until they were faced with this kind of division and angst. And we saw people come together in such a way that I had to make a decision. Do I want to say, the church messed up, this isn't right, I'm out? Or do I want to say, I'm gonna get in that boat and I'm gonna see what I can do? And that's what I did almost 19 years ago when I was ordained an Episcopal priest. And I've been serving in the Episcopal Church ever since. And so again, when I think about these one thing that we can do as a faith community, it really is in that youth work. It is in that place of being able to know the names of those who are coming into your community and reminding them that they are loved. In my experience at St. Michael and All Angels, it was a community that had, I would say about a third were cradle Episcopalians, or people who had been Episcopalian for a long time. It was about a third people who had previously identified as being Catholic, but were trying to find either a middle ground or something a little different. And then the other third that we started to really notice were people who were very wounded, people who had been in other church denominations or church communities that they thought that they belonged and they felt that they were seen until there was a dividing line and they were not. And a lot of that had to do with sexuality and gender, and they had not lost their faith, but they had lost their church. And what I can see from that is the ability of our faith communities to welcome in such a way where you create a bar that is low enough that people can just kind of slide in. And it's not about how it is that we worship or what it is that we sing, but it is that place of you belong here, heal with us, be part of the healing process with us. And that was a huge, huge impact that I saw happen at a congregational level. The other thing that I would encourage congregations to look at, or faith communities, being able to have places of intergenerational conversation. A funny story, last year, during Pride in Portland, there was a dance party that was being hosted, and there's this great organization that's called Hot Flash. And Hot Flash hosts dance parties for women, and it starts at 6 p.m., and it ends at 10 p.m., It's a very targeted time of offering a dance party. And I went to a Pride dance party that night, and when I walked into the room, most of the people on that dance floor were over the age of 70. And when I walked in and I saw this room and I saw these women dancing and having the time of their life, I was filled with such hope because they had survived. And the stories that vibrated that dance floor were so palpable that I felt so encouraged. And it made me just lean in and remember that there are people who have gone before us and that are leading the way. And the ones behind us now have such amazing stories of the same kind of resilience and learning about how much has changed. And those were sort of the markers that have helped me along the way to really see how much has changed, to lean into that hope, and to continue the hard work. Thanks for having us in Pendleton tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Such good words of encouragement, and I know I have a few questions coming out of that. So if you had any questions, don't forget to write them down because we'll get to those questions at the end. Our next speaker is Ari Grubner, and he is the pastor of Grant Park Church in Northeast Portland. And as an openly gay minister in the American Baptist community, Ari is determined to amplify, honor, and celebrate the voices of those traditionally excluded from participating in the full life and community of the church. But what you may not know, and what's not in his bio, is that he's a gaming kind of guy. I mean, not just the video games, but like crosswords, Sudoku. I mean, every game out there. I bet you would probably be the guy that you'd want to invite to like every board game out there. He wants to know game theory. He's talking to you, I mean, all of it. And also he said that it took him 5 years to grow his hair at this length, and it's not really working in this wind here in Pendleton. So welcome him.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, everybody, for having me. I was on the drive out here, and it was not lost on me that not only have I never been to Eastern Oregon, but many of you have not met me. And so at the same time that you are welcoming me into your space, you are extending an opportunity for me to be seen and heard by you, and that is not lost on me. So I wanted to start by saying thank you. To some people's dismay, I am a pastor, and so that means this may sound a little bit like a sermon. I apologize if that's the case. There's one thing that I want to lead towards, and it really is an action step for people, whatever part of this conversation you are joining, and for whatever reason. I hope that this thing that I'm leading towards will serve you at some capacity. And in order to get there, of course, I have to take a detour through one of my favorite Bible stories. I grew up in the Episcopal Church and eventually found my way into a large evangelical megachurch community. And as a closeted gay young man, it was a very interesting environment to be in. One thing, though there are many, and I expect that I might resonate with some of you on this, if there was one thing I carried out from that experience, it was that I loved the Bible. I adored the Bible. When people called it a sacred text, I said yes and amen. And there was this passage, this very short story in a book that you might not expect, in the book of Numbers, Numbers 27, 1 through 11. And today, as we're thinking about justice, us as people interacting with justice, but in particularly justice that we're naming as God's justice. This story was really helpful for me and has been really helpful for me. Here's how it goes, essentially, and you can fact check me on this. That is a pastor's way of getting you to read your Bible, but essentially the story goes that there are 5 women, Mala, Hogla, Noah, Tirzah, and Milcah. They loved the law as God had given it to Aaron and to Moses. They were diligent in pursuing God's justice. And in that pursuit, there came a moment where they realized, this doesn't speak to our experience in any way that resembles justice. Essentially what happens for them is they were not able to inherit any land. Big deal. It is a big deal. When it comes to these 5 women, there's this story of them being excluded from justice. And what they did was they stood up from their place of exclusion and they took it to Moses and to Aaron, and it says the entire congregation. And they said, hey, we're talking justice. Let's talk about our justice, or rather our injustice. So they brought it before the authorities, they talked it out in the tent of meeting, and those authorities brought it to God. Thank goodness. God comes back and says, those 5 women are absolutely right. To the benefit of the entire community that was focused on justice. Justice that's not just a justice that they feel internally, but a justice that they see externally and say, that's God, I'm chasing after it. They spoke up. And it was because of those folks that were listening that it moved itself along. Without Moses listening, without Aaron listening, without the people at the tent of meeting listening, how far does it make it? Those folks that are speaking up from their place of exclusion. So here is my piece of advice, my one action step. If you're hearing this, you've already done about 10 minutes of it. My action step is to seek out the voices of folks that are speaking up from their place of exclusion. I trust you to take it from there, because I look out and I see that there are folks that are coming from all over the place. You are doing spectacularly well. So please keep doing that. There are folks that are excluded. There have been for many, many years. I think it's our, not necessarily responsibility, but our opportunity to keep our eyes and our ears out for those folks in particular. So thank you for hearing my voice, thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you for allowing me to reference my favorite text.
That's one of my favorite stories. Our next speaker is Mr. Brad Hopper. I like to say that. That's a nice name, Brad Hopper. He is a retired professor and assistant dean of the School of Biblical and Theological Studies at Multnomah University, and he is the co-author with his son Drew of Space at the Table: Conversations Between an Evangelical Theologian and His Gay Son. But he also is a bird watcher and a lover of Broadway musicals. Yeah. Which one is your favorite? Because we had a whole conversation about it. You should ask him. He's going to tell you things like, what did he say? Les Mis.
Thank you so much for having me here. I am by far the oldest person on this stage at 67, so I get to wear reading glasses. So I want to just give you a little personal background on this issue for me. I've spent my career as an evangelical pastor and for 13 years, and then for 24 years a theologian teaching Christian theology and church history at Multnomah University and Seminary in communities with a traditional understanding of the Bible's position on sexuality and marriage. I spent 24 years teaching at a conservative evangelical place, and that was my environment. I also happen to be the father of a gay son, whom I love, and who, in the persons of his gay and lesbian and trans friends, who were regular visitors to our home, brought to us some of the most intelligent, thoughtful, and profound human beings who have both challenged our thinking and have become dear to us and remain so to this day. I'm also a person who's called by Christ to love my neighbor without exception, including my LGBTQ neighbor. My son is my closest LGBTQ neighbor. After years of difficult and painful conversations after he came out in high school, we realized we needed to speak against the common experience in Christian, especially evangelical families, that disagreement on this issue meant separation and disconnection. So in 2014, we wrote the book, Space at the Table: Conversations Between an Evangelical Theologian and His Gay Son. In Space at the Table, we wanted to answer the question, what does it look like to love and support each other when you do not agree on this issue? And so in the spirit of Space at the Table and for the purposes of this lecture, how can we love neighbor, seek justice, and stand for the oppressed when we disagree on this issue? And so, from a non-affirming place, can the non-affirming church find ways to be an ally and an encourager to the LGBTQ community? I believe so. So how can this happen? First of all, the non-affirming church must begin with love, curiosity, and humility, rather than judgment and assumptions about character. Most of my life discussing this with evangelicals and conservative Christians, the view of anyone who was a homosexual was that they have just made a perverted choice. I've spent going on 2 decades trying to talk to many of my peers in this area to encourage them that, folks, this isn't about choosing. It's not about a choice. A junior high school boy doesn't sit on the curb waiting for the bus one morning for school and think, okay, today I'm going to make the decision, heterosexual, homosexual, heterosexual, homosexual. No, this isn't how it happens. It is just a developmental reality in the same way that all of us begin to discover these things about ourselves. And thus, it is not about evil or sinful motives. We need to be people of humility. One of my dear friends who's written a lot on this issue, Preston Sprinkle, as he writes as a biblical scholar on this issue, one of the things he says right at the beginning is, look, I could be wrong about this. And honestly, I have no interest in listening to someone who thinks they can't be wrong on this issue. Second, we need to recognize that there are LGBTQ people who truly love Jesus and who live out that love in their love for God and love for neighbor. My experience of this is deep and long and consistent, from friends I met at the Gay Christian Network to students who sat in my office at Multnomah with the door closed telling me things they had never told anyone before. When we realize this about people who love Jesus, it changes the paradigm. And the non-affirming church needs to come to grips with this. Third, we need to focus on motive and not just behavior. In an upcoming book, I have a chapter coming out on this. The book is called Christ-Like Acceptance Across Deep Difference by Baker Publishing. It's going to be out in August, I think. Scripture clearly indicates that the priority of motives and conscience for God. For example, right behavior, that is, sacrifices brought to God, stink to him when they are offered by those with hearts distant from and rebellious against God. The great medieval theologian and philosopher Peter Abelard talked about the importance and indeed the primacy of motive in defining sin. And he said, where there is no contempt for God, there is no sin. We think about this in terms of the patriarchs and polygamy. From my perspective, God's ideal for marriage is monogamy. I think we see this in Genesis and Jesus in the Gospels. The patriarchs had no idea that God said no to polygamy. They had no Torah. The air they breathed in their society was one that was filled with polygamy, and in fact, polygamy sometimes was helpful in their world to especially marginalized women who had been cast away by their husbands. Thus, their practice of polygamy did not involve rebellious hearts, and so what we see is God does not judge them. Further, God uses them as people of faith for the advancement of his engagement of the world for good. This kind of approach leads to, I disagree with you, but I accept that your view and life does not diminish you as a Jesus follower. I accept that your faith is salvific and transformative for you, and that your desire is to love God and neighbor. I affirm that. This can allow for true church participation for LGBTQ people, even in non-affirming churches. Complicated though this may be, I think it's possible. Fourth, I just want to make a few comments about the church and the public square. This lends more to the seeking justice idea for the oppressed, and particularly the oppressed of the LGBTQ community. Part of this really deals with the disaster of Christian nationalism. I believe that this is at the root of much of what I would consider an unhelpful approach by the church towards the LGBTQ issue and people in the public square. In the history of Christian nationalism, we see as far back as Constantine, the emperor of the Roman Empire, that the church partners with government to control public religion, morality, and behavior. And it ends up using the power of the government to accomplish the church's agenda, which usually results in the church getting into bed with Babylon, which is always a disaster. Once the church has done for Babylon what it needs, it is tossed aside. And it also creates an unbiblical focus on power as the means of influence rather than humility and service as seen in the incarnate and crucified Christ. And this almost always leads to oppression and justice. The church, as Luther argued, has a paradoxical relationship with the state. The church, as a member of the kingdom of God, is a prophetic and countercultural community within culture while also remaining part of the kingdom of the world. It is not meant to be the conqueror and ruler of culture or government. Let me say that again. The church is not meant to be the conqueror or ruler of the government or culture. Christian nationalism today is not only a faulty view of the role of the church, but also is focusing on the wrong community, focusing on government rather than the church. So this more biblical view of the church as a community living in paradoxical tension with culture does several things towards justice and love. For example, I believe it allows the non-affirming church to be okay with gay marriage in the public square, even if it decides it will not practice that in its particular community of faith. It releases the church from the need to refuse to bake cakes for gay weddings, instead choosing to bake them and to bake the best cakes they could ever possibly bake as an act of love and as a way of building bridges for dialogue and the common good. It frees non-affirming believers to go to their lesbian friends' weddings, recognizing that personal support does not mean agreement with their friends' view of sex and marriage, and instead what it does is preserve relationship and opportunity for ongoing dialogue. So these are just a few of the action steps, a few of the ways I believe non-affirming churches, non-affirming believers can welcome, encourage, partner with, and even stand up for and with their LGBTQ plus friends, without abandoning convictions that they hold as a matter of conscience. It is still very difficult for my son that we disagree on issues of sexuality. But as I've told him for years, Drew, you don't want me to decide to agree with you, because then I violate my conscience, and then I'm no good to you or to God. Instead, I need to love you and support you from where I am. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. And our final speaker is the lovely Erin.
I wanted to say Ridding, so that was why I was hesitating. It's Writings, correct.
Erin Writings is a nonprofit executive and subject matter expert on K through 12 education for LGBTQIA2S plus.
I always mess that up, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think I added an extra plus in there. In any case, and Indigenous issues, and is currently a 2025 Para Institute Fellow and Executive Consultant. And so we welcome him. He is also a wildflower gardener. And if you ask him, he'll show you he has really great garden.
I've got a full heart joining all of you tonight. Thank you for that lovely introduction, all the welcome I've received from your full team. It's great to meet you for the first time, and I have to give a big thanks to my role model and my cousin Julia Spence, who's here in the front row. Thank you so much for you and all that you do. There's so many things to say this evening, and my contribution to this discussion is really framed around being an advocate within the LGBTQ plus community for over 25 years. It's also based in my experience as a rural person, as being an Indigenous person, and so many other things. And I wanted to just take a moment to thank the Umatilla people here. We heard the land acknowledgement, and that was just so important. And I want to thank not only the Umatillas, the Blackfeet in Montana, Burns Paiute, south of us here in the state of Oregon, and Shoshone-Bannocks in the state of Idaho, for not only hosting, but providing shelter and care to a 9-year-old boy, his 3 older siblings from the Seneca Nation who were orphaned in Idaho and Montana while in service to the Mormon Church, for providing shelter and care to a baby, a young mother and grandmother who hitchhiked and walked all the way out here from northeastern Oklahoma to escape violence, And someone who is, I was close to all of these people, but the closest one, sheltering and providing care to my beloved grandmother, Elsie Lucille, who at the age of 14, from Shawnee, Oklahoma, escaped her foster home in Kansas and hitchhiked and walked all the way out here to build a new life. And it was 43 years ago. It was very early in my time. We were able to celebrate her and her 3 surviving siblings who reunited right here in Pendleton in this community. So thank you, EMO, for deciding to intentionally host some time and space here to get to know and build relationships with the community that is here. I just think that is so incredibly important. So the sum of what I'm starting to share with you, I think, is that I always remember, and I never forget, that I wouldn't even be standing here speaking to you if it wasn't for Indigenous people having each other's backs as people, as human beings, and relatives first. And that's irregardless of whether we're a part of the Native LGBTQ plus community, whether we identify as indigiqueer or Two-Spirit, we have each other's backs. And a key value that I bring forward from my family, from our very diverse faith traditions that we have, is this idea of inclusion. And that's a very deep commitment for us. It means that we don't actually exclude or shame anyone. And it's based on a spiritual truth that we hold close to us. What we believe, we are one in the Spirit, each of us born with purpose. And I'm here as an advocate, and so I think about our call to action. As we think about our call to action, what will we do during what I will characterize as adverse social and political conditions that are not only threatening but harming queer and trans young people, indigiqueer people, Two-Spirit people across the country? Let's consider the choices that we can make, the power that we have to keep each other well and whole, and at a very minimum, to keep each other safe. As we know, that's a low, low bar. Let's be clear, I'm a policy person, so I'll share this bit with you. Let's be clear that discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity is prohibited. And I've spent, it's hard to believe, the last 10 years in Washington, D.C., working to strengthen civil rights protections. We've worked tirelessly on Title IX, federal legislation such as the Equality Act, and even with the decades of work that so many of us have put into that effort, it's still a long-term ambition. And we know that's because, I think as Dr. Dodge, Julie had said, we don't yet agree. Can we agree to build a future that's based on truth and peace and abandon lies and violence? Let's think about that. We're really lucky in this state. In fact, we have one of the most robust slates of protections of anywhere in the country, any state in the country. And one thing that we can do is leverage those protections, the things that we have in law, to protect LGBTQ plus young people. And today things are night and day different from when I graduated from Clackamas High School in 1997. And what we find in schools, after the work so many of us have done, particularly faith communities, is that more often than not, there is a gay-straight alliance or a gender and sexuality alliance, a GSA, in so many schools that students can join. There is a supportive educator, often also from a faith community, who is available and on hand to provide support and solidarity and say, at minimum, you can be here and be safe and learn. More often than not, in the 197 school districts in the state, plus the tribally controlled schools that are here, there is a complaint process for incidences of bullying, harassment, discrimination across the board. We have advisory councils at the school district level. There are advisory boards through the Oregon Department of Education. So for the other advocates in this room and in this audience, what do I do? There is so much for us to do, not to mention family engagement programs in K-12 schools for those who have children of that age. Let's remember that there is a ton of support for people in our communities who are struggling. And I had the privilege of serving as the Executive Vice President of PFLAG, which is formerly known as Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And we can all tonight go to pflag.org, find our local chapter, find a support group, and begin a journey that many have gone on, thousands, millions over our 40 years of existence, of loving and accepting their queer and trans child. We also, for those of us who believe in justice for our queer and transgender family members, neighbors, friends, and other loved ones, need to revisit those conversations so many of us had. I'm trying to see if I recognize anyone in particular, but thankfully no, I can't point you out. About the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We need to, again, figure out a way to resolve some of these disagreements and move forward in a way that embraces truth and peace and abandons lies and violence. Words have power. Let's use our voice, and particularly now, to speak the truth. At GLSEN, I'm giving you another acronym, then tell you what it means. At GLSEN, formerly the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, the leading organization on LGBTQ+ issues in K-12 education. I was the chief staff and the deputy executive director. And one of the things that we did was provide the opportunity for dozens upon dozens of young trans students to provide testimony to the U.S. Department of Education, federal agencies across the federal government, and speak directly to decision makers about how what was happening in the world impacted them. And it was remarkable. They make their voices heard in state legislatures, in school boards, and city halls throughout the country. And there is a reason, it is no accident, that so many people from all communities try to silence transgender women and trans young people in particular. Because when a trans young person speaks to a governor, more often than not, they veto that discriminatory bill. When they speak to a member of Congress, what we hear from the stories of young people is the ring of truth, and we can't ignore the telling of lies. As people of faith, let us advocate for social justice. If you are, as they say, feeling the heat in this particular moment, and like I am, with a bee in your bonnet, you're like, you're not gonna mess with my trans or queer son or nephew or niece or neighbor, and you're asking, what should I do? The simplest answer is to join an organization that's already making an impact. So let's think about building on the work that we do here at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. And I think as some of us have talked about, let's be in community, let's be in coalition with groups like Basic Rights Oregon, one of my first jobs here in the state. The Oregon Safe Schools and Communities Coalition. So many others. We have Two-Spirit societies and DigiQueer-led organizations. Join national organizations like PFLAG and GLSEN, HRC. And first, take a look at our hometowns. Let's think about the leadership that is where we are and build from there. You know, the last piece that I would offer, because I'm staying to 10 minutes also, I promise don't tell on me on the time. The last piece I'd offer is for us to move forward, grounded in our shared history, and to build a future that includes everyone. And we have made so much progress, particularly in the state, at various points in time, on better loving and supporting queer and trans people, indigiqueer, two-spirit people. And the way that I contextualize our shared history, the history that we know, is through a conversation, a decades-long conversation I had with my best friend, Nikki Kavanaugh. And Nikki was something else. She was a ballet dancer, very passionate about art, studied religion, languages, and was devoted to her Catholic faith. She has been a missing person for 3 years. And today, what is true is every other day, I can hear her voice in my head as clearly as when we would talk on the phone or meet for dinner. The example that she set is clear in my mind, and what she did was she was kind to everyone. She was open to them, and she encouraged their brightest potential. She was hopeful, she was optimistic, and that's even after enduring a lifetime of hardship, living in a world that is brutally unfair. And what was always true with someone who met my best friend, Nikki Kavanaugh, was they were not the same after they met her. They were changed for the better. And that was her superpower. And so the last question I'd pose, I think it's the last one of the last ones. What is our superpower, and how can we use it now? Many in the LGBTQ+ community, indigiqueer, two-spirit community, are struggling to find a way forward in a world that not only seems unsafe, it seems dangerous and dangerously uncertain, grasping for that hope. So thank you for all that you will do as fellow community members, as family members, with recognition of our current conditions. And I would just say, one of the things for me that is the most hopeful is that we all have this choice to show up authentically as ourselves in community, and we can keep the faith and decide, even with all the uncertainty and the chaos in the world, what remains the most important. So let's remember, we have each other. We have rights. We have support. We have our voices. We can advocate, make a difference. And we remember. And we can move forward together as one in the Spirit to help build the brightest possible future for everyone. Thanks for giving me some time.
Thank you so much. So we have come to the point in our time together that we are going to get to talk with one another and have some question and answer. And so you have had the opportunity to hear from everyone, and you each got a card, or if you didn't, the ladies will be able to give you a card. We're going to do questions that way, where if you can write your question down on the index card that you received, and then you can pass that card to Mr. David Wheeler, whose hand is up right there. He will collect the card and pass it along to me. We will also get started with some questions that we have already pre-prepared. And then if you have any questions as we're going, you'll also have a chance to pass those in as well. But we're going to take 2 seconds to move this podium out of the way, and I'm going to sit down with you all up here, and we'll chat a little bit. how do you reconcile your faith tradition with the reality of LGBTQIA2S plus, see, I didn't add another plus there, persons?
So as I shared, I was born into, as a cradle Episcopalian, the Episcopal Church, and then I found my way to a very different faith community in a very large evangelical space, before now finding myself in the American Baptist community. And something that I'm sitting with, and maybe it's because I'm particular about words and I like following rules, but when I was looking at these words, faith tradition, reconcile, realities, the first thing I was reminded of is that there are many traditions that I myself inherited, and then there are also very many traditions that I chose for myself. And so when I think about the work of reconciling my reality with my traditions, one thing that stands out is that my reality as a queer person is unique to me, but it is not a unique reality. For the entire time that the church has existed, queer people have existed too. And also they've existed in the church the entire time too. And so the realities of queer people is how I would frame that question. How does the church reconcile the realities of queer people with their faith traditions? How do I, as a person in the church, reconcile the experiences of my neighbors and my siblings with the traditions that I hold very dear to me? So when I think about that work of doing that reconciling, there's one idea that's really helpful for me, and it's the us versus them binary, and acknowledging that us and them do not actually exist. The binary doesn't work for anybody except those who are at absolutely no risk of becoming them. Would like to just let that sit. Absolutely no risk of becoming them. Nobody is that secure. And so the binary simply doesn't work. At least it doesn't for me. So when it comes to reconciling my faith traditions with my reality, I'm very honest about my reality, and I'm also very honest about the traditions that I both inherited and the traditions that I choose to participate in.
Anybody else on the panel would like to address that question?
I think just listening to your response, it came to mind that I've realized that our institutions and our churches aren't perfect. And that's a hard thing, because sometimes we think of church or religion or our faith or our community as a place in which all of these conflicts or struggles don't exist, which just isn't true. And now working at a diocesan level and experiencing more of an institutional way of being in the church, it's not perfect, and sometimes we get it wrong.
Right.
And that's where repentance really comes into play. And so the reconciliation and reconciling, what I was thinking of is just those ways in which sometimes we mess up and we do it wrong, and our capacity of knowing how to repent and recognize, oh, we didn't do that right. But you know what? We can repent and we can make it right, and we can do better, and we can move forward, knowing that sometimes we're going to miss the mark, and if we can see it and we can change it, and then we can move forward. And so I think for me, being able to move through that process of actually the reconciliation process of we're not perfect. We never have been, never will be, but if we're always growing and learning and returning to understanding the do justice, love mercy, walk humbly, we're going to get there.
Amen.
I'd like to just kind of address that similarly this, but from a different perspective, and from the perspective of disagreement. I'm a church historian, and you want to look back at 2,000 years of church history. The church has disagreed with itself over very serious issues over and over and over again for a long time. The problem is when we come to a place where another community disagrees with us, and then we draw a line in the sand and we say, well, you're out, we're in. We're right, you're wrong. And then where it really develops itself is, we're going to heaven, you're going straight to hell, right? And the church has done this throughout its history, and yet, when we look back at it and think, I just think even in terms of times like the Protestant Reformation, that the Reformers were all right in some senses about Catholic abuses, and yet the Reformers all disagreed with each other. The Reformed tradition disagreed with the Lutherans wanted to wipe out the Anabaptists, and yet did disagreement meant that God was only working with one of those communities? Was there only one of those communities that were people of God whose hearts were oriented towards him? No. God was at work and doing amazing things in all of those communities in the midst of their disagreements with one another. We need to learn to become more comfortable with disagreement and to stop thinking that just because you disagree with me, God's not working in your midst. Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
I had a professor who said, or a fellow pastor who said, we just don't do that very well. And to be able to say that consistently and to own that we just don't do that very well is a part of that repentance journey and a part of that owning that our imperfections as church. So that reconciliation is important. Our second question is interesting. How have you felt supported or not supported? And what are some of the actions that people have taken that have helped you feel supported? And how has it impacted your own faith journey, whether it be from a personal or a policy perspective? I think we're going to start with you, Chris, on this one.
Sure. Funny story that happened, I think, just a couple hours ago. I was coming in for the lecture for our sound check, and I ran into some friends from my church at St. Michael and All Angels, and I was dressed differently. I was wearing different pants. I was wearing a shirt. I was not wearing a collar. I was like, I think Pendleton's a little more cash. I'll just, sneak on in here. And I saw a dear friend and was reminded of how important it is to represent, because where I have been most supported and most seen is when I can see myself in the leadership of a community. And where you have an opportunity to be that person for someone else, I'm gonna do my best and try to take it. And so that capacity and remembrance of when you are sitting in a church, when you're sitting at a school, when you're in whatever kind of community you are in, to be the community that's gonna hire the person, to be the community that's gonna raise up leadership within that community, so that there's a multitude of people that everyone else can say, oh, I can see myself in that person. Doesn't mean we're the same, doesn't mean that there aren't differences between us, but to have enough diversity across leadership in whatever organization or community you're a part of, to know that you are supporting someone else feeling like they are seen because they see themselves in you. And so that's when I have noticed the importance of support. I would also say that I travel around the Diocese of Western Oregon a lot, and sometimes I'm scared. Sometimes if I have not been to a place, I have not been to Pendleton, if I have not been to a place where I'm visiting a church and I'm traveling by myself, sometimes I don't know am I going to be safe in this place? And the things that make me feel safe, even when I was driving into Pendleton and going into the first restaurant, and there was a sign that there's a Pendleton Pride coming up in June. I was like, okay, there are people here who are organizing a Pride event. Those are the kinds of things. And when I was a parish priest at St. Michael's, the amount of people who would go to the Pride Parade in Portland, that kind of support, that kind of swell of like, we are coming with you, was also such a sign of support. And the places where I think we're still learning about how to be more supportive, and I heard this question from a colleague of mine at a different event where they said, so you went to Pride with me, but how far are you gonna walk with me on this journey? In those policy examples, in these places where we have to go further, are you gonna go with me there? And those are the things that I'm curious about.
Erin, would you like to add it? You spent a lot of time in what you were sharing about support and about connection to different people. How would you add to that question?
Well, as you can tell, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the impact of the current moment on young people, and thinking about schools as the place where we go when we are young, don't have those choices, don't have the agency, are more vulnerable, and how important that is. And one of the things that I was learning in Colorado at a seminar last week was about how many private religious schools are welcoming and affirming of LGBTQ+ students, what that looks like. And I think in terms of support, that's an example we should lift up. Learn from those administrators, learn from those teachers, learn from those communities about how they can be a religiously controlled school, community of faith, and really be in harmony with the affirmation and the support that their queer and trans students need. So that's what I'd add to this part of the conversation.
Anybody else?
Yeah, there's this quote that's coming to mind from Audre Lorde. She talks about how in American society, it's usually those folks that experience oppression and objectification that are tasked with stretching out and bridging the gap between their own experiences and their oppressors, the folks that are doing them wrong or doing them an injustice. She talks about how it's the responsibility of the person carrying that weight to also stretch out and bridge the gap, make it make sense. And I was just thinking about, I don't know if this is necessarily a very particular thing to say of how I felt supported or not supported, but man, when someone steps in and offers to help me bridge the gap, that is so important. To not feel like I am taking on that weight of being understood and also maybe helping someone understand, coming together and understanding one another better, to come together and do it together. That is really supportive. So whatever the resource is, whether it's a financial resource that you can give to an organization to say, hey, there are these folks that are coming together and supporting you, or you know the best routes around your neighborhood for a good walk. Like whatever your resource is to support someone and say, hey, I'm with you as you're bridging the gap. That's what resonates for me.
Okay. Our last question that we had in our pre-prepared questions, has a little bit of preface to it. There's a lot of discussion about young people and different laws and policies in different states about how we treat young people. And we all know that there are very high rates of suicide, specifically among queer and trans youth. And so our question is about how do we navigate and honor youth and family rights? And how do we keep kids safe? We're going to start the answers for that with our.
I think this one's with Aaron.
Aaron.
I defer to the expert.
Sure.
I defer to the expert.
I'm happy to jump in here, and we just start by saying something really magical happens when young people get together and start organizing and mobilizing without adults getting in the way. And it was a really particular experience I had way back in the day with the Clackamas County Youth Advisory Commission, the Cascade AIDS Project Youth Advisory Council back in 1999. And thankfully today we've learned a lot since those initial efforts. So what happens when young people are given the tools to come up with ideas and work with each other, as opposed to setting up systems and processes where we've got to get adults out of the way to prevent harm? And I think it's really incredible. We were talking about Pride here in Pendleton, Prides in rural cities and townships and villages across Eastern Oregon. And so many of those started not because an adult got in and said, you're going to do what I tell you to do, but because young people got together and we're given the space to say, here's a really impactful event that we can have in our community that really fits with who we are and what we're about. And so for so much of this discussion, and there is reason as a person who does research and who is an empiricist to take a look at that data about adverse health outcomes and connect the dots about why we're there. There's something really powerful about flipping that script and really saying, what happens when we go from a youth leadership development and leadership model first? And thinking about the All Souls Church, which is about a 15-minute walk away from my home in DC. It's a Unitarian church, and it's where a cappella group named Sweet Honey in the Rock recorded a song everybody here knows on children. And what do they say? I won't sing to you today. Your children are not your children. They come through you, but they are not from you. They belong not to you. And this understanding that I have from my family's diverse faith traditions, this truth that we hold on to and that I would offer in this space. We're one in the Spirit, and we are born with purpose. And so from where I sit, from where I understand today, I'm not in a position to interfere with who or what anybody else is meant to be. So I'd start there.
I want to make sure that I have time. Thank you for that. I think that's so important. And I think that we'll continue to answer that question, but I also want to throw this question out that came from the audience as well. And so if you want to continue to answer that question, but also this one, it says, what is the most respectful way to offer or become an ally? And I think that, you're thinking about some of the responses, like whether it's with children or anyone else, what are some of the respectful ways that we can be allies and offer support? I think that's an important question.
I think the first, it's just showing up.
Mm-hmm.
I think looking for those opportunities. Pendleton Pride is coming up, and being visible. That is a way that you can show up as yourself, as an ally for what is already happening. I think so often we think that we have to come up with the thing that we have to do, when oftentimes what we have to look around and say, what is already happening? And I would say that a lot in church communities, like, what is God already doing, and can we join God in that? And that's a way that I think is a very respectful way of being an ally, is where can I show up?
For me, my biggest encouragement for anyone looking to be an ally is be the best ally that you can be. Don't try and be the ally that you've seen someone else be, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's like only we can walk in our own shoes, and the best allies are the ones that it doesn't just feel like here's a person who has something to offer to little old me who's going through it. There's my ally. But it's a reciprocal relationship, and I think that just like any relationship, any friendship, be yourself in that, and those folks that you really connect with, I think will rise to the surface, especially if you are going to Pendleton Pride.
Dr. Brad, you talked a little bit earlier with me about listening. Do you want to share?
Yeah. Well, that really goes back to the issue of curiosity, and I think this is particularly true for people for straight, cisgendered people in non-affirming traditions. Before you open your mouth to talk about what you disagree with, open your ears and listen to where a person is coming from. What I encourage people to do a lot of times when they're struggling with this issue, they're struggling with what this is all about, to just, when they meet a queer person, to just say, tell me your story. I want to know about you. And just listen and learn. And that is the kind of conversation that goes to the heart. And when the heart is transformed, it really takes care of a lot of issues, and makes things really become more workable.
Question directed specifically to you, Aaron. You mentioned the two-spirit, and I'm trying to read the handwriting. Would you please say some more about, I guess, what it means to be two-spirit? Is that, yeah, about what it means to be two-spirit? There's a lack of familiarity with that term.
Well, I think, and thank you for the question. It's extremely exciting, and we're going to have a lot more folks learning about some important news and having some visibility on the formation of the first ever national organization by and led by Native LGBTQ plus folks. And, you know, there's been a lot of questions about how communities will define the term two-spirit. And I think, you know, if we talk to Native leaders here from Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indians, they probably have something different to say than the Eastern Two-Spirit Society outside of Baltimore and Washington, D.C. And so I would encourage all of us to keep an eye out for the website for this new organization, the National Two-Spirit Equity Center, to learn more about this emerging leadership structure and the way that we're going to be defining this term in the future based on Native LGBTQ plus folks who are going to speak about that. In general, I would say, you know, when I was listening to folks from the Eastern Two-Spirit Society say that, you know, it's really accurate to talk about being a non-binary person, somebody who's kind of in between. And others can speak more to this. They can also speak more to what it means to be an indigiqueer person, an indigenous person who is LGBTQ+. And some of the significance of this term, two-spirit, I think we're going to get more information on that, more agreements on that as this organization develops. And by the way, very excited that our Native LGBTQ+ delegation is Grand Marshal and World Pride in Washington, D.C. next Monday, next week.
We could go on and on. I know I reserved my own questions, but I'm sure we will have more time for more conversations as the days and years roll on. But that just means that we just have to meet up again, doesn't it? And maybe it'll be another time in Pendleton. Maybe it'll be another time in another part of Oregon. But we really appreciate you joining us, and thank you each for coming and being vulnerable and sharing your stories with us and sharing your points of view. And we thank you for being respectful and hearing and listening and opening your ears and your hearts. I now would like to invite Reverend Scott to come up, and he's going to give us our benediction as we prepare to depart. Am I leaving anything out, or is there anything else that we need to know before we depart from this place? Oh, Christy's going to come first.
I guess there is a plan to continue the conversation at the Rainbow Cafe. I've been assured that they have pretty good bar food, I think is what Pastor Karen said when I saw her on the street earlier. So not a requirement, but you know, if you want to continue to talk, and I don't know, assuming that our speakers still have the energy to go further and get a little bar food. It's just down the block, like 2 blocks down on the other side of the street. So we hope that you'll join. Oh, you have a question? Yes, definitely. Let's thank them. Thank them so much. Thank you. Yes. And we weren't able to broadcast this live, but we were able to record it. So we will send it out to all of you and to all those folks at home, wherever they are, who were hoping to watch it, and hopefully we'll get that to them very soon. So thank you for being here. And now Reverend Scott.
Now, I had a whole plan. I was going to set this on the podium here, and you wouldn't know I'd be talking from my phone. But here we are. I'm good. Will you all join me in an attitude of prayer? Holy One, it is with gratitude that we come before you. We are grateful for our panelists, for the questions, for everyone gathered here and those who will be watching later on the video. We are also grateful for the holy conversation that has taken place here today. God, you call us to be a people of love. Recalling these words from 1 John chapter 4, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love." Beloveds, let us go forth now in peace, and may the love of God always be our guide and our challenge. Amen.
Amen.
I didn't know you were a word guy.
Yeah.